This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And thanks to a few Battlefield PvP practice servers, we're able to show Jonathan the cobbled together weapons of Rust.
Wow, what a monster. So this is a 12 gauge shotgun. I think this is meant to be made from plumbing supplies.
If there are any other games, guns, or mechanics that you guys want to see Jonathan break down, let us know in the comment section below. Make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one, and if you'd like to help out the Royal Armouries Museum and continue to support Jonathan's work, check out the links in the description of this video. Right, over to Jonathan.
Right, this is a really quite a fun one for me because this weapon, if I can call it a weapon, is something that's actually from the Royal Armouries collection, and I have it with me today. It's not identical to what we see on screen, as I'll explain in a moment, but I am about 90% sure that the Aoka Pistol is based directly on this specific object. So the difference is the big one, I mean the stick's the same pretty much, and the wire wrapping it onto the together. The big difference is the barrel, which in the game is some sort of an iron tube, whereas on the real thing it's a 20mm cartridge case. And to make it a barrel, all they've done is dent in the top of it and drill that in the center to create not only a touch hole or a vent if you prefer, but a pan for the priming powder, and that's probably the biggest divergence from the game version. This is really a medieval handgun or hand cannon recreated using the cartridge case as a barrel, and you need that depression to fill with powder so that there's something to go flash so that the gun goes bang. What we see in Rust is the player is striking the barrel with a rock, and it's creating a spark off the iron or steel barrel, and the spark's somehow going into the gun and setting it off. It's not completely implausible, but it's pretty daft. So whereas this is not a very good weapon, but it would fire for one shot, the one in the game I'm not confident would work at all. They've kind of covered that by showing it require multiple random hits from the rock to actually fire. So they put that level of thought into it. There are some fun and interesting weapons in this game for sure. This is the shovel AK, kind of infamous in the firearms world because round about 2008, photos of an AK with a shovel grip buttstock appeared on the internet. Instantly the image sort of spoke to that post-apocalyptic vibe of how would you keep a gun like this in functional order if you haven't got spare parts? But actually, what it was even more fascinating. Guy, I believe in the States, had decided to make a Kalashnikov rifle, which is what we're looking at here, a caricature version of one, to make an AK out of a shovel. And he didn't just use the grip, the handle, as the buttstock. He took the blade of the shovel, heated it, hammered it, and forged it into the U-shaped main receiver of the rifle. So, how's that relevant to what we're seeing here? Well, of course you can't say necessarily that this receiver's been made out of a shovel blade, but I wonder if they're trying to hint at it, because it is a solid receiver with the top cover kind of integral to it. And those of you who know the Kalashnikov know that's not how it works. It also diverges from the AK in the selector switch, which is a thumb selector switch, more like a glial. And if we look at the other side, we see that there isn't the classic big AK safety selector switch lever. That's just not there. Different design around the ejection port, different cocking handle. So it's a sort of a squint and it's an AK. Easily close enough to be a tribute to the famous shovel AK. I quite like this improvised bolt-action rifle. It looks like it's something you could actually build and might actually work, although the receiver looks to be welded sheet metal, and you need it to be quite strong up front where the barrel is attached, depending very much what it actually shoots. The way the thing actually fires is kind of curious. I'm not sure if other weapons in the game are doing this too, but the recoil is slightly off. So the gun is built as a right-hander, as it should be, and it's fired from the right shoulder, and yet it's recoiling off to the left. One-handed pistol shooting will do that because of the sort of biomechanics of how you're holding it and how it recoils. Rifles, though, because they're nestled in your shoulder and pushing you back and to the right, so that's a bit weird, a bit counterintuitive. So the rifle we've got here, I did have to look this one up, because although it's clearly an AR-15 derivative, it's not one that I was familiar with. And it is the LR300. So one of the sort of tactical flares that we see in the handling of the LR300 is that they flip the gun onto its left side and look at the right side. The idea of that is, if you're not counting your rounds, the idea there is the gun stops firing, you quickly flick it over to check that it hasn't jammed and is in fact empty. The bolt is locked to the rear, there's no cartridge case in the feedway or anything. Then you flip it back over the way to reload it. But that's what that is, in case anyone was wondering. Quite an interesting effect visible there, where we're shooting at some distance and you can see the bullet drop. But what I'm seeing is the rounds are hitting the ground and they're bouncing up, which is a real phenomenon. Smaller calibers like 5.56, which is what this would be, probably not so much, not something I've witnessed, because they're very small, they tend to break up when they hit something. For a game that isn't trying too hard on the realism front, it's quite impressive that they've got their ballistic models worked out like that. This is, of course, the FN Minimi. Specifically, it's the M249. It's quite detailed in the modelling. However, when we reload this, importantly, when there are no rounds left, there's still a complete belt of ammunition in the gun somehow. They've stopped at a certain point in modelling this thing, effectively, or at least in the reload animation. It behaves quite believably. Kind of works as you'd expect an LMG to work, certainly in a game. Here we see it used to literally batter down a wall. Maybe 5.56 isn't the ideal caliber to be total breaching a door, if that makes sense. So, and actually, I don't know how effective it would be. I think you'd have to use quite a lot of ammunition, especially 5.56, to blow enough small holes in a door to actually remove it, which is what we see happening here. So this is where it gets particularly interesting with post-apocalyptic setting and improvised firearms, whereas this thing is craft-produced. It's been made by somebody. I've grabbed a couple of examples from our collection to illustrate the range that this can encompass. And this one is actually a similar configuration to what we see on screen. It's about the same proportions. Now this is actually more of a small factory-made gun than a man in a shed, and so it's finished to quite a high standard. At the other end of the homemade / craft produced spectrum is this thing, and this is more akin to what we see in the game here. This one is a Northern Ireland loyalist terrorist example. Sheet metal and that round tubing, and then the all-important solid steel barrel and bolt. How well it works, I can't say. Not very would be my guess. Also, a point worth making about this is it has the classical video game grip wrap that doesn't always make a lot of sense. Well, here, it may not be essential, but it's quite important. It gets quite chilly up in Northern Europe, and so cold and potentially sharp metal under your hand is not ideal. So they've just put a lot of turns of black electrical tape around this to give you something of a comfortable grip. Nice that they've gone to quite a lot of trouble in conceiving this. They haven't copied, as far as I know, any specific homemade design. They've come up with their own based on things they've seen, and it looks quite plausible. MP5, my favourite modern firearm, I think. Don't necessarily think it's firing quickly enough. It sort of chugs along a little bit in this one, but it definitely looks decent. Loads as it should. Now, the MP5 and weapons like that in this kind of collapse of civilization setting are going to be a bit more problematic to keep running than a lot of other designs. The roller delay will wear out will become less reliable over time, and eventually it won't work, and you probably wouldn't be able to find the spare parts for it.
Headshot, headshot, headshot. Yo, he dead.
So the other submachine gun, proper submachine gun in the game is the Thompson. It's a good model. It looks suitably distressed, and most notably, buttstock has had a catastrophic failure at some point, and they have taped on some kind of metal rod replacement for it. I think I'd probably just give up and use it without, rather than what looks like an extremely wobbly arrangement there. And the front hand grip has also become detached, despite two very large looking bolts on there, and is taped in place. So it gives it that that aesthetic. Whether the Thompsons would still be around and functioning, I don't know how many years in the future this is meant to be, but you'd probably be able to get that, keep that running, maybe. If you are the sort of person who can make a firearm from scratch, or have access to people who can make firearms from scratch, they could probably keep a simple blowback submachine gun like this in working order, fabricate new parts for it probably, and not the typical setting for a Tommy gun. We've had it crop up in Fallout, of course, but yeah, it's not your go-to Mad Max-esque weapon. I'm liking the look of the homemade shotgun. It's vaguely reminiscent, not in look, but in function, of the Winchester 1897 shotgun, pump-action shotgun, where the bolt will protrude back over your hand when you operate it, just because of the design of the receiver. Most modern shotguns, well, all modern shotguns, contain the bolt within the receiver, so you don't have that sticking out. You don't have to worry about where your hand is. So you do on this one. Otherwise, it's quite a chunky looking welded sheet metal design that looks somewhat plausible. The magazine tube, well, first of all, it's visibly got a spring in there, so it's housing the pump grip more than it is housing a magazine tube by the look of it. So I don't know where all 6 of those rounds are going to go. I don't think they've sort of thought that one through. Ew. I am less of a fan of the sort of pipe guns. This rifle has got a big open drawn tube as a receiver, which doesn't inspire confidence if this thing's meant to be, as it appears to be, 5.56, some kind of rifle caliber. Homemade guns firing rifle calibers are problematic because they are operating at a much higher chamber pressure. There's a reason why you typically see pistol calibers, shotgun rounds, that level of pressure, because you can more easily design a gun to take that. Unlike some homemade looking guns in games where they don't really look like anything, this looks like it has been made from stuff, which I very much appreciate. Some sort of bit of driftwood as the stock there. I don't know that you would bother with an enveloping stock like that, especially as it doesn't actually have a wooden buttstock as part of it. We've got a separate tubular stock bolted to the wood. But hey, homemade guns are at the whim of the maker or designer, so we can't be too critical of that. And we've got a bit of wood taped to the barrel as a heat shield, which you would need for this. Yeah, so in terms of real world weapons, this thing is a bit of a mess. It's a big, heavy pipe. This is meant to be a launcher of an explosive munition. So a big, heavy pipe would be a good start. And improvised launchers like this have been made. So you can look this up. The acronym was PRIG, and it was the Projector Recoilless Improvised Grenade. And this was an improvised IRA shoulder-fired launcher. Now, the thing about that was, about any launcher of a big, heavy bomb or rocket munition, is that you need to balance the recoil. Because if you're firing this thing or launching this thing, you've got to account for physics. Every action having an equal and opposite reaction. If you just have a closed tube, a gun, and you fire essentially a 5-pound bullet out of it, whatever it is, you will be on your arse from the recoil. So, All of which is to say, this thing is a shoulder-fired gun. It is not a recoilless weapon. It is not a rocket launcher. It wouldn't work. Well, it would work, but you would fall over every time you fired it. Back to quite a nice, plausible-looking, homemade-ish revolver. So when this thing is opened up, we see, well, firstly that it's 8 shots, which is unusual. There is also very little real estate in that cylinder to accommodate all those chambers. You need thick chamber walls, just like you need thick barrel walls. And if you look at that open cylinder, there's a little wafer-thin bit of metal between chambers that would quite simply blow through. If not with the first shot, then with successive shots. The other thing this reveals is there's no ratchet on the back of the cylinder, so there's no actual means of rotating it. So, all things considered, what this should be is a manually operated revolver. And the other side of it is how you're cocking and firing the hammer or the striker. There's no visible means of that happening as you pull the trigger. There isn't space in the frame really for that kind of lock work. So I would see this plausibly only working if you manually cocked it, like the striker on the Liberator pistol from the Second World War. Wow, what a monster! I mean, if the hose clips weren't a clue, the flanges on the pipes would be. I think this is meant to be made from plumbing supplies. So this is a 12 gauge shotgun. It breaks open like a 12 gauge shotgun. The big issue here is there's no latch for that big heavy barrel. So just on a very practical level, it's not going to stay shut, but certainly when you fire it, there's going to be a lot of pressure on there. Trying to force it apart at the pivot, I'd be a bit concerned about that. And the other thing about this design is we've got the classic 12 gauge shotgun extraction and ejection going on, but there's no actual way of that happening. You would be looking for a handy rod to bang out what would probably be a stuck cartridge case, or desperately trying to get your fingernail in, which wouldn't end well, I don't think. If you'd like to see more of the Royal Armouries collection, we have our own YouTube channel that you can head over and check out. We've also got links in the description for ways to donate to us, and also links to my book, which is this is on Bullpup British Firearms, but is also available from the Royal Armouries shop. So if you're in the UK, it will be cheaper on the shipping. In any case, I'll see you again next time. Thanks very much.